Cavan Elizabeth, a wedding photographer based in San Diego, and today I'm going to be talking about all the things that you need to know if you or someone else at your wedding has a mobility disability and you're wondering how that might affect your photos. Before we begin, I want to say that I am not an expert in disabilities by any means. There are so many kinds of disabilities. So today I'm going to be talking about the general disabilities that might be affecting people's ability to walk or to be more mobile. So that's what I'm going to be discussing because that's the thing that affects the timeline of the wedding day as well as the photos the most. I am going to briefly mention, because somebody wanted me to talk about glasses and like whether or not you should wear them and vision and those sorts of things too. And then lastly, I'm going to be discussing anything that might be revolving around somebody at the wedding who is mentally impaired, because I do have experience with that and I want to make sure that that gets covered. So this video is going to basically just be a blanket video on all things disabilities, whether it is very mild or very severe disability. And I'm going to apologize in advance if there is terminology that I use that might not be completely correct. Again, I'm not an expert. I did as much research as I could, but there are so many words these days that one day they're fine and then the next day they're not so appropriate to say, so some of them aren't quite common sense. So apologies in advance if I do that, but I'm going to try my best to make sure that everything I say is nice and peachy. Somebody did ask me when I was putting out information about this video whether or not your photographer needs to have had experience with disabilities, and the answer is no. Photographers are often working with new situations all the time, different information from different couples that might change the way that they have to work. So no, you don't have to have a photographer that, I don't know if there are photographers who specialize in weddings where there are disabilities, but you don't need to worry about that. The main thing that you need to make sure you do, especially if it's you or your partner who has a mobility disability, is please tell the photographer all of the information in the world, because we cannot make assumptions about your mobility limitations or your energy levels or where you can go, where you can't go, what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate. So it is up to you to let us know. We, at least me, I am always going to try to be as sensitive as possible. But at the same time, I don't want to pry too much, even though I might need certain information to make sure I plan the day accordingly. So I really appreciate when my couples have a disability and they let me know everything about it, because there might be times where I don't want to ask, but I want them to tell me everything. I want to know how comfortable they are. And then on the wedding day itself, if I know this information, I'm always saying, okay, if you get tired or if this is something that you don't feel comfortable with, please let me know. Don't just suck it up and try to fight through it. I don't want you to be uncomfortable. So please let your photographer know in a very kind way if on the wedding day, after you've told them all of your information, you do start to feel like you can't go any further or you need to take a break or whatever it might be. Please just say, hey, I need just a second, or hey, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it up there. Can we do something different? So always know that it's great to have an open and honest and kind conversation about this, because the more we know about your disability or your partner's disability, the better we can serve you and the better we can plan for your photos. So of course this applies if it's you or your partner who has any sort of disability. I'm going to be talking in a couple minutes about what to do if it's not you or your partner. Perhaps it's a family member or a bridal party member, so I'll get to that in just a second. I had a couple of questions about assisted devices and whether or not they should be shown in photos, and that is a very personal decision. If you want your assisted device, whether it's a walker, it's a cane, a wheelchair, or something else, if you want that in the photo, then let them know that. If you don't want it in the photo, because some people really don't. Some people do have the ability to stand, and they might want to take their wheelchair or their walker out of the photo and have somebody support them or just be standing. So that's for some people. Some people cannot stand whatsoever, but maybe want to be placed in a chair from the wedding day instead of their wheelchair. So that is entirely up to you. And if you wanted to maybe decorate your assisted device, have a florist put flowers all around it or something pretty like that, that could be a really nice touch to make it more of a wedding day accessory and not just your life device. You can make it a little bit more fun for the day, so you're kind of incorporating it into the wedding celebrations itself. Now, if you or your partner is somebody who can stand and can walk a little bit, but maybe it's tiring, my greatest suggestion is to save your energy all morning. save your energy for the portraits and for your ceremony. So that means during getting ready, stay seated, try not to lift a finger, and then we'll get you into your dress, or you'll get yourself into your tux or your suit, depending on what you're wearing, and then you can have that energy for your portraits. If you ever do start to feel tired, like you need a break, maybe switch to some photos of you guys sitting down somewhere. Maybe there's a ledge or a bench or something nice. I do that anyway with my couples, even if they don't have a mobility disability, but it's something that's a really great tool to use. I had an engagement session in a wedding this year where the bride had suffered some mysterious illnesses, possibly a stroke, she thinks, and she lost a lot of her ability to walk, and a lot of her energy was drained. So during the engagement session, she would be in a wheelchair. We would wheel her over to a spot. She would get out and stand, and the groom would hold on to her in a really cute way, or we would have them sitting. And that's one of the things that I wanted to mention with this story, is that something like that is going to take more time. You will need more time for your portraits. You will need more time for your engagement session. You might have fewer locations that you can get to in your allotted time because you are going to be moving a little bit slower, or maybe it takes longer to get somewhere. If you are in a wheelchair, of course, you're going to have to be looking for locations that are accessible, which sometimes at wedding venues aren't the easiest thing in the world. But again, tell your photographer ahead of time if it's terrain that you can't go through, or stairs that you can't do, or if it's a long amount of walking you can't do. The more information you share, the better. All right, I'm gonna quickly talk about glasses. Now, glasses can sometimes be an indication of severe vision loss for somebody, or if you're like me, extremely mild. So I don't feel comfortable driving and I cannot go to the movies without my glasses, but I can pretty much see fine without them. But for some people, they cannot see anything without their glasses, or it's extremely blurry, and so they have to have glasses, and maybe they don't wear contacts ever. Now, I have very, very few clients who wear glasses permanently. Most of the time they've been grooms. I don't actually think I've ever had a bride who wore glasses on the wedding day, but I have had a couple of grooms who did. And pretty much every wedding they're like, oh, should we take some without? And again, I say that is up to you. That is your choice. We can do both, so you have options, or you can keep them on, or you can take them off for the portraits. So that is, again, such a personal choice. If you're like, well, should I do it? Then go ahead and do it for a few photos. It's not going to hurt to have some without. But again, maybe you love your glasses and you want to make sure that they're on you at all times, and then you don't mind having them in photos, or you just love your glasses, and that's okay too. Now, I did have somebody ask me, what if you have some vision issues where you can't always look right at the camera? And that you're going to need to tell your photographer about, so they can let you know, hey, shift your eye gaze a little bit more to your left, something like that. So again, the more we know, the better, because if nobody told me that, and then I was showing up at a wedding and my bride or my groom was just like constantly looking past my shoulder, and I'm like, oh, look right here, and they didn't say anything, and be like, what are they looking at? So please let us know that, because if we don't know, then it's a puzzling situation to us, or it might make the process more difficult for everybody. So always tell your photographer if there's anything going on. For me, my eyes are incredibly sensitive to light. I can barely be outside without sunglasses. Even on overcast days, sometimes I just simply cannot keep my eyes open. So I had to tell my photographer that. I had to say, okay, here, I'm gonna let you know I cannot keep my eyes open. We're gonna have to do a 1, 2, 3 countdown, because otherwise I cannot see. My eyes are watering and they hurt, and I'm straining to keep them open. So let them know about things like that. Even if you think it's really small and silly, it's extremely helpful to know. Now I wanna move into what happens if you have somebody else at your wedding, so that's not the bride or groom, or bride and bride, or groom and groom, who has a mobility disability, and what you need to do, because that person is probably not going to have direct contact with your photographer. You need to ask them and relay the information to the photographer. So I usually have a great rapport with my couples. I know them well, but somebody on the wedding day I've never met before, and I'm not going to feel comfortable. I'm going to feel even less comfortable asking them about their situation than I would with the couple. So make sure that you're asking that family member. I have a lot of couples that might have a really old grandparent who, because of their old age, is not very mobile. That's probably the most common thing that I see, is just mobility disabilities from simply having old age. So if you have a grandma or grandpa or somebody who is simply of an old age, let us know that. They're usually not in that many photos if they're a family member compared to maybe the bridal party and especially the couple. but let us know, because then that way I say, okay, for family photos, I'm gonna need to make sure I choose a location that's close to the venue or close to where the family is meeting, so I don't have that grandparent or the aunt and uncle or whoever walk too far. And I also don't want to choose a location that's kind of rocky or that they can't get to or that involves a lot of stairs. So I always want to plan around that. And now if it is somebody who is not of old age, so it's not just easy to say they can't walk very far, then you need to ask your guest or your bridal party member about that. Family and bridal party are really the only people who I personally would want to know about if there is a mobility disability, because if it's just a guest at the wedding that's not part of that, then I'm not having to do any accommodating with the timeline or with the planning for that person because they're not in all of these group photos. But for the family and bridal party, I do need to know, because if they can't walk very well or they can't walk at all, and things might take a lot longer to get them from A to B, or we might be limited in where we can shoot, then I need to plan accordingly in the timeline for that. I might allot an extra 15 minutes just to make sure we have enough time for all of the walking, traveling, whatever it is, to get to our portrait location. And then within that location, how often are we going to have to be taking breaks? So that's just something that's really nice to know, because the last thing you want is to be running out of time for your portraits because things were slow moving. So you want to plan ahead and you want to have padding. So I did have somebody ask me about a bridesmaid that they have who has a walker. And they were asking me if I had ever seen a bouquet tied to a walker or maybe the walker floralized, and I have not. However, I would ask that bridesmaid, does she want to have the walker in the photos for the group photos? And if yes, whether she wants it or she simply needs it, then I actually think instead of doing a bouquet, what would be really beautiful is to floralize the walker. So maybe have her send a photo of her walker to you, and then you can send that to your florist and say, I would love to do something special and unique for this bridesmaid. Since she won't be carrying a bouquet, she will have her walker, and I want her to feel as much of a part of the floral experience as possible. And I think that would be a really beautiful touch. Now, if your bridesmaid does not want to have the walker in the photos for the group photos, and maybe she's just having it going down the aisle, then I would do a bouquet, and then for the walk down the aisle, you could attach it in some way. Again, let the florist know. The florist might have something they can put on the walker that the bouquet can go right into. So that would be a best of both worlds scenario. Somebody else asked me about their mother who has a hard time standing for a long time. She has low energy, she can't get around very well, but the bride wants her to be part of getting ready, helping with the dress. So again, what I suggest, just like I mentioned earlier, have the person save their energy until it's time. So make sure they're not running around, make sure they're not trying to help with things. Just have them saving their energy, and then let the photographer know this. So then the photographer can say, okay, I'm ready for mom. Let's bring her right in, shoot, 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 whatever we need, and then the mom can be done. So she can save her energy for the ceremony and the rest of the day. In group photos, I already talked about a bridesmaid who had a walker as a specific example, but I mentioned earlier in this section about whether it's one of you who has a mobility disability and wants to have your assisted device, if you have one, in your group photos or in most of your photos. And now I'm going to talk about that for family and bridal party in general, where it's up to them to let somebody know that whether or not they want to keep their assisted device. I think usually the assumption is that they want to keep it in the photo, so they need to say something if they don't want it. Now, if it's somebody who can't stand or can't stand very well and is usually sitting in a wheelchair rather than using a walker or a cane and is usually upright, then what I will typically do is, again, bring in chairs and have them transfer from their wheelchair or from whatever they're using into the chair. So they're sitting and they're comfortable, but what they're sitting in might be a little bit more cohesive with the wedding day, might be a little bit more comfortable for them in terms of the way everything looks. So they're not seeing the wheelchair, they're still sitting, but you're seeing the chair. Now again, some people don't mind the wheelchair and that's great, but for somebody who is asking about not using their device, there are a lot of different ways to accommodate that, whether it's using chairs, pulling chairs from your ceremony or from your reception site, which I do anyway in large groups because I like layers, or if it's simply having somebody stand next to them who can provide standing support, so holding onto their arms, something like that. I have a lot of grandparents who don't want to sit in their wheelchairs or use their walkers in photos, so I'm constantly having to find different solutions that work for people on the fly. So it's always nice to know that you do have the option. Just let the photographer know that they might want to get out of their chair or not use their device, and then we can accommodate appropriately. Now, the last section that I want to talk about is mentally impaired guests or maybe a family member. I have had a couple of family members have an autistic son or daughter that's in the photos, and they let me know ahead of time because there is a difference between maybe a child who is acting out because they're just being a child who's a little bit unruly and somebody who has a mental impairment and they cannot control their behavior. So it is really nice to know, because I'm really not going to deal with those differently, but it is nice to know in my head what to expect. Hey, this nephew of mine has autism, it's very severe, he might not look at the camera, so I know that. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of effort and energy trying to really get that person to look at the camera for me if I know it's not really going to happen. We're going to do our best, but I'm not going to go to town on it and be just like going after a lost cause. So it's nice to know, especially if there's an adult in the family who has a mental impairment, that I really want to know about, because kids you kind of talk to in a slightly different way. You have to have more patience with them. They might not understand directions, or they just might not want to listen. But with adults, you kind of assume that they're able to take direction well and pay attention. But if they have a mental impairment that is going to make that not the case, it's nice to know so that we don't get frustrated. We already know going in, hey, Aunt Becky has this that she's dealing with, so I know exactly what to expect from Aunt Becky. And if she's not listening, that's okay. I'm not going to, again, try to force something out of her that she is not capable of doing and make everybody uncomfortable with that whole effort. So just tell us that. It's really nice to know. We like knowing what to expect. I never want to be surprised by something that might have a huge impact on the photos on the wedding day. I want to know ahead of time. And if you do have somebody, whether it's an adult or a child, that has a mental impairment that is going to be in group photos, it can always be a really great idea to have someone else there who knows that person really well and can help with the photos. I have a lot of really cool like aunts and uncles who will often help me get the child's attention, whether they have mental impairment or not. It's just very helpful with children in general. They'll help me get their attention. And then sometimes with adults with mental impairments, they will have somebody with them who's sort of just their safekeeper for the day and helps them out with the photos. And it really helps me to have that, because I don't know this person, I don't know their background, I don't know how they respond to different situations and different all the different stimulating things on the wedding day. So to have somebody there who is not necessarily in charge of them, but who is sort of their helper for the day is just a great idea, not only for the photos, but also for the wedding day in general, so that they always feel safe and comfortable, and you can make sure that if there is going to be an issue, that somebody is there to help them right away, so it does not pull you guys away from the wedding, because the last thing that you want to be doing on the wedding day is taking care of other people. Everyone wants to take care of you guys on the wedding day to make sure it is a fantastic experience for you. I really hope that this video is helpful. I know, of course, I cannot cover every specific disability that is out there. I've tried to do my best to cover mobility issues and limitations in general when it comes to photos. And again, I think the best thing to do is to have open communication. So hopefully you will take this information, and if you do have a disability, or your future spouse does, or somebody in your family, you will now take all this information and give it to your photographer, give it to your venue, just give it to everybody who might need to know, and they will be so glad that you did, and you will have a much smoother wedding day experience as a result. I'm also going to be going live on September 24th at 6 p.m. Pacific right here on YouTube, so please mark your calendars, and I'll see you guys there. Bye!